Hey folks, David Stewart here. Orc posting's back. Orcs are racist. And if you like orcs and if you use orcs, you're racist. So this is an old complaint. It pops up every year, every couple months, and it's been going on since Return of the King wrapped up and won all of its Academy Awards. The complaint goes something like this. Orcs are racist. Orcs represent some human race. I won't say which one because it's really obvious, because the people who are offended on behalf of that race think that that race shares many characteristics of that race, thus they're projecting their own racism onto orcs. But that's besides the point. As a fantasy author and as someone who's actually used orcs in my books before, they serve different functions depending on the story, the setting, the authors. There's orcs, say in Legend of Zelda, the moblins are orc-like. They're often portrayed as kind of piggy bad guys, having pig-like faces, or just something that is most noticeably not human. And that's the important thing I want to bring up about orcs. Orcs are not humans, and they're not intended to represent humans. They're monsters, and that's how Tolkien created them. In Tolkien's mythos, they were created by Melkor, who twisted and shaped them from basically elves, and that's what you got. You got orcs, and orcs represented all of the evil that Melkor put into them. They had a lust for blood. They were under his dominion completely. Savage and wild, all of the things that really are necessary for, if you're going to tell a story, to have a force of evil. You want the minions of that force of evil to not only be dehumanized, like orcs are not humans, but also to represent something that is unstoppable, chaotic, doesn't listen to reason. It's really something that isn't human, something that you can't stop and have a negotiation with. It's something that you have to fight to the death against or to run away from. And it doesn't have to just be orcs. You can use this in lots of different fantasy settings. If you ever read like the any of the stuff that was like the Prydain books, those have the Cauldronborn, which are these undead things, and these in a similar way represent a force of chaos and an unyielding force that's coming to attack you that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be humanized in a sense. So it's important in a lot of fantasy works to have non-human enemies, and orcs definitely fulfill that purpose. Orcs and goblins, which are really the same thing in Tolkien's universe. And so that's really how they use them. And so things that are derived from Tolkien tend to use orcs in that way. Orcs are monstrous. So in Dungeons and Dragons, particularly early editions of Dungeons and Dragons, you didn't really do orcs as player characters, because for an orc to be able to be cooperative with people and not act like a crazy savage that wants to tear everybody's throats out would be very exceptional. The whole point of orcs is that they're monsters like goblins or kobolds. These are not human things. They represent a force of nature and something that is an obstacle for players in Dungeons and Dragons, and in a story setting it'd be an obstacle for other people. Now in my setting it's a little bit different. In my setting, they really are just a savage remnant of a completely different race, and we'll get into this probably when the third book in this series comes out this year at some point. We'll get a little bit more into the history of that, but orcs are in here, and of course, they're the primary component of a mercenary band because that's what they do. They go around waging war. They're not the demi-humans in my books are. I try to make them decidedly not human. This is something that I think has arisen from people entering into the tabletop RPG space over the last 20 years or so and impressing upon it their views of how things ought to be in the fantasy space rather than operating with the previously existing tropes. So they come in and they want to be elves, they want to play as elves. Elves are not human, and they really should be viewed as something very apart from that. Likewise, playing as, say, fae beings or fairies or orcs or something like that. Really, you should be playing as the kind of standard mortal races and primarily humans, because humans operate in the way that you would expect. And if you play as one of these other races, like say a halfling or something like that, in the older editions you were expected to role play that halfling, meaning that if the halfling would do something that halflings do, he would do it, not that it's you as a halfling. I think this is something that kind of newer players tend to do, is they role play as themselves. They're like, well, I feel very virtuous and I wouldn't want to steal that, so I'm not going to steal that. It's like, but you're a halfling rogue. Halflings steal everything. So you should steal that because it's an opportunity to do so and get away with it. That's exactly what a halfling thief would do. So that's kind of the way that I approach role playing. It's like you set up the character the way they are, and then you have them execute the actions the way that you've set them up, according to their personality, which you've designed, or their racial background. So racial tendencies are just part of gameplay with D&D. It's just something that's built into the game so that you have predictability, and you also have kind of a set of guidelines for how roleplay is supposed to happen. And it's only after that, it's like, well, I want to roleplay as an orc, but he's a good orc that is also a really nice guy, and he has hurt feelings. Like, that's not an orc at that point. Right? But why you're just being a human and looking at racial bonuses or something like that. I think also World of Warcraft has had an effect on how people view orcs, because World of Warcraft, and indeed not just World of Warcraft, but Warcraft, you had the orcs versus humans, and you had two campaigns. You could play as humans, and you could play as orcs. And I don't think that the early versions of Warcraft portrayed the orcs as anything besides wild, really evil, demonic savages, but it's fun to play as the bad guy sometimes, so that's kind of the appeal of that. Rather, I think once you get to World of Warcraft, really it starts with Warcraft 3, you have a lot more view of the orcs as a as a race that's identifiable, that has its own history, and they start to kind of emulate Mongol humans and be very human in their approach to things. They have a kind of a warlike culture, but they're not as much orcs as they used to be, unless you're looking at some of the kind of standout characters that are really like Garish Hellscream or something, or Grom Hellscream, that were really established prior to World of Warcraft. They still act like orcs, but most of the others really just act like people. They're sensitive, they're just kind of slightly tougher people. They maybe have some green skin, or now brown skin, or things like that. Same thing with trolls. So once you get to the World of Warcraft level, in order to make people feel good about what side they're on, you start to have a lot more. And this wasn't totally there in vanilla, but certainly as time has gone on, you have a lot more stuff that allows the player to identify positively with whatever faction they happen to be playing with. I think the whole appeal of playing Horde was to play as the bad guys initially. You used to do things like go poison dogs for undead alchemists and things like that. And later on, it's gotten to be a little bit nicer, I think. But, there's always times. I think the undead faction always has a little bit more of the Snidely Whiplash bad guy streaks in it. But for sure, I think the orcs have gotten a little bit more like there's two sides to every conflict kind of thing, a little bit more identity, more humanization of the orcs, if you will. So to me, orcs are a monstrous race as Tolkien portrayed them. They can operate differently in different settings. There's really orcs in a bunch of different things. There's orcs in Legend of Zelda. Right, moblins, those piggy bad guys in Legend of Zelda, are basically orcs. They work for Ganon. Ganon looks like a piggy bad guy himself. He looks like an orc, and therefore he's going to command orcs. And they're really just bad guys that you can kill without feeling bad about it. Same thing with stormtroopers. When you take away the human mask, then it's really easy to just view them as cannon fodder to blow them up. Make the army out of droids. You have an endless line of droids that are an unstoppable force, and you really don't feel bad about blowing them all up. That's the whole point of dehumanizing the enemy in a fantasy setting. And you can say that that's bad or good, but if you're trying to tell a story about overcoming a force of nature kind of evil, then you really don't want to humanize the enemy. That would be for really a different kind of story. Now, I will bring up one thing that I think is very interesting, and that is the movie Bright with Will Smith that I've reviewed on the channel a while back. It's not a bad movie. It's pretty good for like a Netflix straight to direct release video, and it has some good elements to it. But in that, you have this weird portrayal of orcs basically as just urban American blacks. They dress like urban American blacks. They act like stereotypical gang members and things like that. And at the same time, in that setting, there's also urban American blacks that coexist within that. Orcs really, they have their own, they're kind of inward looking culturally. It's very weird how they portray them. But I think you can make a case that they would be somehow racist in that one, even though they're really used as a proxy to talk about racism very directly in the movie Bright. Not so much to try to propagate racism, but it definitely comes from the opinion that orcs represent black somehow. Orcs represent non-white races, and then creates a story based on on that assumption. But I think if you're sitting around complaining about Tolkien's orcs being racist, I think you're just impressing upon orcs your own views of minority races rather than just looking at them as what they are, which is they're monsters. Trolls are not representative of any race either. Trolls are just nasty, awful, monstrous brutes that you can't really negotiate with. That's the whole point. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. More Storycraft videos coming for you every Thursday, and I'm going to try to stick with that schedule. And I'll see you guys next time. Oh, you can get the book, Water of Awakening. There's some orcs in it, and some elves, and some very interesting fey creatures. So you probably like this one if you like a lot of fantasy, and then the sequel, the Neil Ash series, which is all bundled up in one book now. But I have one of these little ones hanging around still. So you can check out those. Third book in the series will probably be coming this year if I can get all my ducks in a row. And the newest book, of course, is Keys to Prolific Creativity, which you can get right now for $2.99 for the ebook and help refine your creative process. So thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time.